would think of, and to begin to connect this intergovernmental process with civil society. That was the idea of the meeting. It was a brilliantly organized meeting, and they gave as a title to the meeting a slogan that I think should be on the wall here. The slogan is, "For our freedom and yours." I didn't really know the history of this slogan when I first saw it, but it was first used in the Polish Rebellion of 1830, the November Rebellion. And it was written in both Polish and Russian because they were also supporting the Russian Decembrists. That was the 1825 uprising in Russia, because they knew that their freedom would depend upon freedom in Russia. This was at a time when Poland was ruled. This was during the partitions ruled by Russia. It was subsequently used in the revolutions of 1848, the uprising of 1864. In 1968, it was used in the first Russian human rights demonstration on Red Square in support of the Prague Spring. So it really captures this idea of cross-border work, and it was the slogan for this conference. I might note, by the way, that when Vice President Biden he was in Central Europe at the same time. You'll note in the speech that I have in Lviv, given on October the 25th, that 3 days earlier, Biden gave an important speech in Bucharest, in which he picked up the themes of this conference, and I don't think it was any coincidence. And basically he said in this speech that he mentions the Eastern Partnership Initiative. He said this is an example of how to move democracy forward, and he said that the United States would join as a partner with Central Europe in realizing the promise of 1989, but that the leadership had to come from Central Europe. And I think it's terrific how something like this then translates into U.S. policy, which is seen as a different U.S. policy now toward Russia. Now, the issue of Russia was important at this conference. First of all, it was in the background, but in Havel's videotaped message to this conference, he first of all criticized Western Europe for putting their own economic interests above what he said were human rights and freedom. And he said that this was not only immoral, he said it was suicidal, and that if you try to make your compromises, and he used the word evil, if you try to make your compromises with evil, ultimately it's going to make evil worse, not less. I went from this meeting in Lviv to another meeting that the NED was involved in and supported in Stockholm, which I think really graphically illustrates what Havel was talking about. It was a meeting of human rights defenders from Russia who were working in the North Caucasus. Just the weekend of this conference, on Saturday, one of the human rights defenders in Ingushetia was murdered. He was just shot down on the street. This meeting was prompted by the murder of Natasha Estimirova in July, and then a series of other murders. The human rights defenders in the North Caucasus are being killed. 3 people who were at this meeting are targeted with assassination. I kid you not. One of them is Oleg Orlov, the head of Memorial, another NED grantee, who is going to receive the Sakharov Award from the European Parliament on December the 16th in Strasbourg. He is now under prosecution because he basically held Kadyrov, who is the Putin-appointed person who runs Chechnya. He basically said that he had something to do with the murder of Estimirova, which I think is undoubtedly true. And the fear is that he is now targeted. Also, another human rights activist who's going to be talking at CSIS on Friday, by the way, Tanya Lokshina, who runs Human Rights Watch in Moscow, is also targeted, and another activist from Ingushetia who runs an organization, a human rights organization that the NED supports. The situation is grave, it's critical. They were coming up with recommendations. The meeting was in Sweden. Sweden has the presidency of the EU. They were coming up with recommendations that would go to the Swedish government in anticipation of the EU-Russian summit on November the 18th, recommendations that had to do with how the European Union could pressure the Russian government to implement the decisions of the European Court. They have not implemented these decisions, and to improve its human rights performance in so many different ways. But what we saw at this meeting, I mean, the threat that these human rights defenders are under vividly illustrates, I think, what Havel was talking about. Because here you have, it's a terrible situation. Here you have this enormous country right on the border of Europe where this kind of murder is going on. And I think the objective has to be ultimately to, first of all, to prevent Russia from using its economic power, its oil, to basically manipulate and control and isolate Central Europe, but ultimately to reach out to Russian friends. I mean, there's no reason why Russia ultimately shouldn't become a more democratic country, and we want to see Russia become a more democratic country. But right now there is this conflict. And I think if we look, on the 20th anniversary of the fall of the wall, if we sort of look to the future means expanding the scope of democracy in the Central European region through things like the Eastern Partnership Initiative, but also seeing beyond that. And this is a kind of alternative strategic concept to the one that is now being promoted out of Moscow, which is to, sort of reestablish a kind of Russian control over its neighborhood. It's a real struggle that's going on, and I think the kind of people that were both at the Lviv meeting, looking at how to implement the Eastern Partnership Initiative, and at the Stockholm meeting, looking at how to defend and human rights defenders in Russia who are under such grave threat, are both very, very important initiatives that I think deserve the solidarity of all people who want to see, as Biden said, the promise of 1989 realized. So we have a real, continuing problem on our hands, but I don't think there's any reason to be pessimistic, because I do believe that even though it's difficult, sometimes it's two steps forward, one step back, but the forward progress of democracy in the region, I think, is something we can see, and I think it's inexorable over time. Thank you.